So, quick introduction to me, if you haven't met me before. My name is Matt Shaw, and what I do is I train people in the creation of value propositions and insights. I've done that quite a bit over the years. Over the last 20 years, we calculate I've trained about 35,000 people in 27 different countries, worked on 100 different projects for some of the companies that you can see on the screen. Again, I know from registration, we've got plenty of sort of return visitors from some of these companies. So welcome to you guys. And if you work for a company that's not on this list, well, hello for the first time. The thing that sort of defines the companies I work with is they tend to be extremely clever at inventing things. They're good at developing new technologies and innovations, scientific sort of breakthroughs, and all the sort of high-tech solutions that we expect in innovation. The issue very often, however, is that they're not so good at creating insights. That's the difference between outside-in thinking, where you ask the customer what they need, and inside-out thinking, where you create a solution and your start point is more can I rather than should I. So the session today is going to be looking at this idea of insights. I'm not going to take anything for granted here. I started my career and somebody sat down and explained what insights were, the definition of them, what a good one looked like. I was very lucky that way. But I've met people over the years and no one's ever started at the basics. They've just said to them, I need an insight. And they have absolutely no idea where to start. So let's start at the beginning by defining what an insight is and what an insight isn't. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to use a program called Mentimeter. Now, this is on your browser. So I'm going to share this on the screen with you now. But basically what you need to do is go to a website called menti.com. Hopefully you're seeing that on the screen. I'm going to copy the link actually and put that in the chat. So you should be able to just click immediately on the link and jump straight to this survey. But if you go to menti.com and you type in the code that's at the top of the screen, you'll get there a different way, which is 89701021. Right, brilliant, and we're off and running. So what you'll see is as you enter the information on the screen, the votes begin to tally up and we can see, how people are currently thinking about this question. And the question is, choose the statement that you most agree with. My company has insights, but doesn't use them effectively. My company is lacking insight. Number 3, your option is, my company doesn't even understand what an insight is. And number 4, which is kind of looking a little anemic here at the moment. Thank you for that one person. My company is fantastic, is great at insights, no issue. I'm here just to enjoy and be satisfied at other people's issues, but I and my company are perfectly fine. Thank you very much. So as we go through, you'll also notice down at the bottom right corner here, we have a tally which shows that 32 of you have so far voted on this. We'll just give you a couple more seconds to vote. I'm going to ask you a couple of other questions as we go along, but I think you can see the same as I can. In fact, the numbers are remarkably symmetrical. That actually at least 50% of you have answered, my company has insights, but does not use them effectively, which is a little bit troubling, right? Which says, I think we have the information, we're just not using it. We don't know how to apply it. It's not being used in an effective way. I was with a group in Paris actually last week, and someone said, we have tons of insight. And their colleague turned around and said, actually, I would suggest we don't have insight. What we have is feedback. And that was a very telling comment, because having feedback is absolutely not the same thing as having insight, as I'm about to explain. So let's jump back to the presentation. And I'm going to tell you what we're going to cover in the hour that we've got together. Number 1, what is an insight? Let's get into the definition. Then number 2, the formula for creating one. If you wanted to start off, you've not done it before, perhaps you have done it before but need a refresher. How do you create an insight? Number 3, the difference between observation and insight. This is the single biggest mistake that people make. So let's cover that off, see where the pitfalls are. Then why accepted customer beliefs or consumer beliefs are not the same as insight. Then I'm going to give you my favorite examples of some insights, both in B2B and B2C, and my best worst examples of insights. I think people kind of expect me, if you've seen me before, to show you some examples of horrendous insights or projects on products that really should never have seen the light of day because they don't have an insight. So I'll do my best to satisfy the people who enjoy that kind of thing, like me. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're going to have questions at the end. Remember, you can ask questions at any time. We've got someone who's moderating this who'll collect those and collate those. So you don't need to wait till the end and all the questions come in at once. You just drop them in the Q&A as we go along, and I'll address them best I can at the end. Okay, good. So let's start at the beginning. What is an insight? Okay, simple question, but quite a complicated one to answer. A few years ago, I was with a company in the US, in Andover, in Massachusetts, actually, and they said to me, Matt, we already have an insight. Before we begin the project, that should save a bit of time. So I said, good news. And they said, the insight is women take twice as long to call for an ambulance after suffering from a heart attack. And I said, good, and what's the insight? And they said, we just told you. Women take twice as long to call for help when they have a heart attack as men do. So I said, but that's not an insight, is it? And they were adamant it was. They said, yes, it is. It's true. I said, like a fact. And they said, yep. And I said, okay, then I agree with you. It's a fact. It's a piece of data. It's what I will call for this session an observation. But that doesn't make it an insight. And they said, of course it is. It's statistically accurate. So again, I concede it is. It's probably therefore a statistic, but it's still not an insight. And then they said to me, Matt, you've got to concede, because you're being belligerent here, that this is extremely curious. Well, again, I agree. It is a curious fact. There are no rules, by the way, that say facts cannot be curious. One of my kids said to me the other day, did you know that it's actually illegal to only own one guinea pig in Switzerland? And I didn't know that, to be honest. And I'm not entirely sure what to do with the information now I do know it. It is, however, true, and I guess quite curious, however, not an insight. So we have to understand the difference, therefore, between observation and insight. So what I'm going to do, if we looked at the dictionary, I'll tell you what the dictionary would say an insight is. It would say it's a deeper understanding of something that was previously hidden or unknown, an aha or a eureka moment. That's what the dictionary says. Now, of course, dictionary is not thinking about marketing. It's not thinking about innovation. It's just describing that word in broad terms. But I think that's a really good definition. And what you'll understand there, and there's some things to pick out from here, is it says it's a deeper understanding of something that was previously unknown by anybody else. So I'll tell you that 90% of the mistakes made in insight generation is the thing is true, but it's blatantly obvious to everyone, including all of your competition. And that, by definition, fails the torture test at the first hurdle of being an insight, because if other people know it, then you haven't discovered anything, and that isn't an aha moment or a eureka moment. The sort of way of thinking about an insight is when you tell it to a customer, when you play it back to a consumer, your target audience, their innate reaction should be, well, that's true. Now, what you just said, that's true. And yet it's so obvious. I wonder why no one has ever said that before, right? That's how you should feel when you hear an insight. That's blindingly obvious. I didn't know it, but now you say it, I recognize immediately that it's true. And then I wonder why your company is more sophisticated. Now, they'll come to a couple of conclusions on why you know something that your competitors don't. They'll decide that you've taken more care and attention to go find that out, that you have some kind of empathy for their job or their role that they're playing in their organization, or their patient, or their customer, or some aspect of their day-to-day life. They'll say, this company either has taken a great deal of care and attention to understand where I'm coming from, Or even maybe sometimes they think, I wonder whether people who work in that company have done the job that I do. So, lots of you, I know this for sure, you gain clinical insights within your organization quite often because you employ people who used to be radiologists, or they used to be MR techs, or they used to be veterinarians, or all sorts of things. And that's quite helpful, because what it does is it shows a deeper understanding, and you can make those connections. And what you really want, because it's really brand building ultimately, is that they turn around and say, I love that company, I love that brand, because you obviously understand me. And because you understand me, I'm going to buy your products, because the chances are, if you get where I'm coming from, your solutions are going to be much more appropriate. Now, the dictionary does go on to say it's also a eureka moment. And I don't know whether you know the story of this, but the original eureka moment was Archimedes in ancient Greece. So the story here goes, the king of Greece has this gold, and he commissions some jewelers to turn it into a crown. Now, for reasons I'm not sure about, he's entirely skeptical when he gets it back that they've used all the gold that he gave them, or at least it's made of solid gold. So he commissions all the great thinkers in ancient Greece to go off and prove to him whether the crown is indeed made of gold and the solid gold that he gave them. Now, none of the great thinkers in ancient Greece can sort this out, can work it out, can prove anything, including Archimedes, the ancient Greek mathematician and philosopher. He can't work it out either. And then the story goes, having completely given up on this, one evening he sits in his bath and he watches the water in the bath rise up and displace over the side of the bath. Now, I'm going to stop the story there, because this is the vital bit of difference between an observation and an insight. At this point, all he has is an observation. He has a piece of data. When you get in the bath, the water rises and goes over the side. What you need to be really clear on is that isn't competitive in itself, because anyone else who'd ever sat in a bath had seen the same thing. And let me tell you, I go into organizations all the time. They say, Matt, we don't need this. We have tons of feedback, as I mentioned, from customers. We have a sales force, 14,000 of them across North America and Western Europe, who are meeting customers all the time. We have a ton of information flowing back into the company. We buy all this stuff from Gartner and IRI and Taylor Nelson, all this really important data. We have big data. Yeah, but that stuff is visible to all of your competitors. They also can go and buy from IRI or Gartner the report on the mobile communication trends in Europe in 2022. They bought the same data you've got. They get the same feedback from customers. That isn't in itself competitive. Seeing it isn't the same as having an insight. In the same way that when Isaac Newton sat under that apple tree and the apple fell down, I swear to God, it wasn't the first thing that ever fell down, and he isn't remembered for seeing it fall down. Things had been falling down forever. So the thing that's missing in this is what we call insight synthesis, which is the translation of what is happening into a deeper understanding of why it is happening. And in our story of Archimedes, he jumps up out of the bath and he shouts Eureka, which means I found it, which is he understood beyond the observation the reason that the water was coming out of the bath, which for the physicists amongst you will allow him to work out whether the crown is made of gold or not by submerging it in water. That solved the problem. That solved the king's problem. So I guess that's the next key piece of information, which is an insight in itself isn't that important. It's only important when it drives a more appropriate solution. So think about insights in this way. An insight is a question that needs to be answered. The better you understand the question, the more you are in a position to solve it more appropriately. Better the question, better the answer. More superficial the understanding of the question, or the wrong question leads to the wrong innovation and the wrong solution. So my definition of an insight would be a deeper, more competitive understanding of a customer or a consumer or a consumer need that leads to an aha moment. It's got all the aspects that the dictionary requires, plus it's related to innovation and marketing. Let me show you an example of an insight very quickly. This is Asics. They're you know, a running shoe company. You may own some Asics shoes if you're a, you know, a professional runner, or you run a lot, or you know, take your running seriously. Now they have just produced a campaign in which they're saying body transformation is not always visible, or transformation with exercise is not always visible. The insight being that all of their competitors say, you know, it's only working if you look different when you finish exercising, if your exercise has led to a physical transformation. But actually exercise leads to a mental transformation. Getting out there and just getting some exercise is, you know, very, very important for our well-being and mental health. And that they, as a uniquely, are beginning to communicate that that's what they think the importance of exercise should be. That's an insight. Now you look at it, you go, well, you might be thinking, well, that's obvious. Exactly what I said. You know, that's been staring us all in the face. But then you have to ask yourself, well, why has no one said it before? Why does all advertising for their competitors look different? And now that they've said that, it makes you think, well, I guess they understand it a little bit better. I guess they care that little bit more. For the right target, that insight will make them far more predisposed to buy from that product. And that, by the way, don't think this is only in B2C. This is in B2B. You know, customers in B2B, doctors, nurses, veterinarians, purchasing and procurement departments inside banks, right? Risk managers who are worried about cybersecurity, doesn't matter what it is that they're doing. These are people, they are humans, they have emotions, they care about things like this as well. So if you understand the risk, you know, for e-banking, and you can help a risk manager in a bank look more professional, or you can help them to look more competent, or to achieve what they're trying to achieve, those insights work in B2B just the same way as they do in B2C. Okay, now thinking about insights for a second, one of the big mistakes that people make is they think they're doing this. So they say to me, Matt, we already do this. We're interviewing loads of people. We run loads of market research. In the 1940s, there was a Harvard professor who said the following thing: no one ever needed a drill. Ever, ever, ever. No one ever needed a drill. And the reason for that is that they needed a hole. Okay. Now, what does that mean? It means that companies focus too much on asking about the technology. So they'll say to somebody, a customer, you know that drill that we make, what's wrong with it? You know that drill that we make, how could we improve it? You know that drill the customer makes, what do you like about their drill more than you like our drill? Now that seems like a good question to ask, right? And these companies convince themselves that they are in fact doing insight generation. But actually what they're doing is they're building the entire question predicated around the answer, right? So the customer is very limited in what they can say. Well, you know, make the drill longer, make the drill shorter, make the drill wider. I mean, what can I say? You only asked me a very narrow question. Now imagine for a second you didn't ask about the drill, but you asked about the hole. Forget the drill for a second. Forget the technology. Forget what we make. What is it you're actually trying to do? What's your desired outcome? Right? Now that changes everything about the way they will answer, because they'll say, oh, why do I need a hole? Well, because I've just bought a new house and I've painted and plastered all the walls, and now I want to hang some pictures up. And you might say, well, the last thing you need then is a drill, because that's going to put a dirty great hole through your new paint and plaster. And sure, you'll hang a picture up, but you'll never be able to move it, because now it's disguising the damage my drill just did to your wall. Now, imagine for a second, we actually addressed that insight by saying, well, I had thought this was going to be a drill, and my whole going in position was this was the right solution. But now I understand what you actually need. Maybe you need something different. I don't know whether any of you have seen this. This is command picture hanging strips from 3M. They are essentially a way to hang pictures on a wall without causing any damage to the wall, right? And I'll just show you a video of that now, so you can see that if you've never seen this before.
You can do this. Grab those command picture hanging strips and let's make it work. They're tool-free and they hold strong. Oh, rustic chic. An arrow angled to point at rustic chic. May I be honest here? Let's take that down, damage-free, with a stretch, remove, and look. No marks, no mess. Like a pro. Command, do no harm.
Okay, so I get it. You know, some people say, well, we have to get the answer that we need because, don't be naive, Matt, we own a drill factory, right? Somewhere around the corner, we've got some enormous capital expenditure in drill manufacture. We've got IP in drills, right? We've got loads of patents in drills. It's hugely inconvenient if the answer isn't a drill. So clearly we're going to ask all the questions, but filter out anything that's unstrategic or unhelpful. We have to have the answer being something that we want to make. I'm not entirely sure what those people expect me to say, but let me tell you a story. Let me explain to you what used to happen if you wanted to get a taxi in central London. I'll just kind of paint the picture for you. If you could actually flag a taxi down, they don't legally actually have to let you in. They just wind down the window and they ask you where you're going before they let you in. And if you say, well, I'm going south of the river, they might say, well, I don't want to go south of the river because I'm going east, because I'm sort of broadly going home. And so to take you that way would be out of my way. So I don't want to take you. Can you picture the scene where a taxi and a taxi journey is predominantly driven by where the taxi driver wants to go? But if you could get in this taxi, you'd then say, well, how much is it going to cost? And they'd say, I don't know. We're on a meter. We'll find out when we get there. So you'd say, well, that's pretty concerning because I don't know I've got enough money. So I hope you take credit cards. And they go, no, I don't take credit cards. I don't like credit cards. That costs me money. I have to pay fees. That's hugely inconvenient and expensive for me. So no, I don't accept them. So you say, well, what do you expect me to do? And they say, I expect you to get out in the rain, go over to that bank and draw the money for the journey out in cash to pay me. And you say, but I don't know how much it's going to be. And they go, well, get enough out that you think may cover the journey, then spend the entire journey watching the meter go around and pray to God that you've got enough out. And that was broadly how it worked for years and years. And then Uber come along, right? Now, Uber took my credit card about 10 years ago when I first registered. I've caught Ubers in San Francisco. I've caught Ubers in Shanghai. I've caught Ubers in Hong Kong. I've caught Ubers in Paris, right? I've never had to worry about currency. I've never had to worry about payment because it's all on file. They immediately tell me when I register how much it's going to cost, and I get to make that decision before I take the journey. And interestingly, they don't tell the driver where you're going. So the driver cannot filter out journeys they don't want. They don't know the destination of the passenger until they've committed to picking them up. And so do you know what the black taxi drivers in London have done? They've started blockading the roads, right? They've started saying, this should be illegal. You should shut this down. This is outrageous. And if you say why, they go, because it's killing my business. Yeah, but it's killing your business because they're doing exactly what you should have been doing. And don't say you didn't know, because you had people sitting in the back of your taxi for 20 years giving you those insights. You should take credit cards. You should do this. And they went, yeah, but I don't want to because this doesn't suit me, because this isn't my strategy. So they ignored those insights as long as they could and then got blindsided and then started to go out of business. 14,000 black taxis went out of business during the pandemic, just as a point of reference, in central London, abandoned the whole process due to the fact that there isn't sufficient business there anymore. I'm not particularly sympathetic to that, to be honest, because I'd experienced the sort of way in which they dealt with customer insights for years before. Now, I work with companies, and this happens quite a lot to lots of very big companies. You know, in the old days, it used to be if you were 140 years old and your company had been around a long time, you could pretty much guarantee that you weren't going to go out of business. And now 6 guys in Silicon Valley in a room can put you out of business in about 3 years, because what they do is they actually listen to the real insights. They don't have that legacy. They don't have that kind of back sort of drop that says, well, I have to ignore that because it doesn't suit me. They go, I'm not sure why these big companies are constantly ignoring the reality of what people need, but it's really, really annoying the customer, and I will solve that. And then those companies go, why didn't we see this coming? And the answer is, well, you didn't see it coming because you chose to ignore it. You either asked about the drill, so you never heard about it. You only asked about your model, your solution. You never asked insights about the whole. Or you did, and when someone said something that was inconvenient, you just ignored it. But this is the reality of insight generation. Market research is not an exercise in circumnavigating around customer objections until you get to where you were going in the first place. Insight work is about hearing something that you didn't expect, a discovery about something that was previously hidden. If you know how it's going to turn out in the first place, well, what would be the point of doing insight work at all? Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If you ask the same customers, those purchasing departments, those interventional cardiologists, those MR techs, those sonographers, the same question that you asked them last year and the year before, you see this ultrasound device, how can I improve it? You see this probe, what's wrong with it? If you ask those questions, you will get answers, of course you will. But you'll get the same answers you got last time, and you'll get the same answers next year, and you'll get the same answers the year after. And then worryingly, companies come to the conclusion they already know it all. They go, we don't do market research because we never learn anything. Or what we learn is what we already assumed. So, QED, don't need to do it. We already know everything. Let me distill this all down for you. I think there's only two ways to actually create insight. Number one, change who you talk to. So in B2B, for sure, we're talking to those same procurement departments, those same purchasing departments, those same decision makers who always say, I love what you do. I just need you to make it cheaper. I need you to cost engineer it so that it comes down in price. Then I'll buy it. And then everyone comes back and says, our products are too expensive. If we make them cheaper, people will be more satisfied. That's the insight. But actually, if you talk to the person who's using it, the person who's installing it, the person who's having it used on them in that value chain, then you may hear something different. And having a combination of voices in the value chain in the insight generation process will mix things up a bit. So number one way of creating insights is to change who you talk to. And number two is to change the question. Stop asking about the drill, start asking about the whole. But for sure, if you ask the same question to the same people time and time and time again, you will not gain insight. A little bit like this company, this is the example I always give of a company that's drill-based in their insight work. This is Polaroid. They made cameras that spat out little bits of paper. Now, those little bits of paper, fantastic as they were, was a good idea in, say, the 1950s and 60s. After that, they just kept on repeating the process. And their whole insight process was, those bits of paper that we make, how can we spit out bits of paper better? I mean, it's quite a narrow kind of set of insight work, isn't it? That camera we make, we want to make more of them, just tell us how to improve it. Now, the consumer, God love them, will try and give you some kind of help with that. They'll say, well, make the white bit around the outside slightly smaller, make the picture slightly bigger, make the camera slightly lighter. I mean, they'll give you suggestions, but you'll still make that camera. Their advertising agency said Polaroid's problem was they kept thinking of themselves as a camera. Now, Polaroid is not a camera. It's a social lubricant. The more thought you give that, the more profound it is, because what their advertising agency was saying is they were narrowly defining themselves as a technology, as a format. So whenever they asked questions, if it didn't fit their definition of themselves, they dismissed it. So the story is in the 70s and 80s, Polaroid developed the digital camera. But because they defined themselves as this, instead of as the value and the problem that they solved, they dismissed that as something that they didn't do. We don't do that. That's not what we do. Bizarrely, if you define value, the value of Polaroid, if you try and define it, I think it's to create instant memories. And what better way to create instant memories than digital photography? So Polaroid should have made the digital camera. Even today, I can't think of a better placed brand to do it. Polaroid digital photography makes total sense, but they absolutely went out of their way not to do it. This, however, is their most recent innovation based on their insights. This is a printer that prints out little bits of paper that come out of your phone. So you connect it to your phone, it prints off what's already probably bigger on the screen of your phone on a piece of paper. Don't get too excited by it. It costs about $150 US, and to buy the printer, and then each set of 30 pictures costs a further about $20. And again, the pictures aren't that big. They're 2 by 3 inches, so they're tiny. Now, I showed this to my 16-year-old son the other day. His first question was, what's that for? I said, I don't know, son. I don't know what it's for. He then said, how does it get on Instagram? I said, well, it doesn't get on Instagram. It doesn't get on Snapchat. It doesn't do anything you actually want to do. What this is doing is it's what Polaroid want to do. It's the drill, not the hole. It's what they've been doing for the last 50 years. Every other time they kind of skirted with bankruptcy, and they're going to do it again and again and again, because that's what they do. They're just making an ever more narrow definition of themselves, and they only ask questions around, well, assuming you want a little piece of paper, how do you want that piece of paper? That's the drill, not the hole. So if I was going to give you a formula for creating an insight, just give you a little kind of structure for thinking about it, I always call that the 3 W's, right? W number 1, what is happening? Don't get me wrong, you do need observations, you need data. They're the building blocks of insights, but they're the beginning, not the end. So women take twice as long to call for an ambulance after having a heart attack is an interesting observation. That's the what is happening. That's the water displacing over the side of the bath. That's Newton seeing the apple fall down. You need that. But your next piece of information is, why do women take twice as long to call for an ambulance? Well, as it turns out, the insight work that this company ended up doing showed that actually the symptoms that women are educated on for a heart attack will invariably be male symptoms. So, they're told, well, a heart attack, the symptoms to watch out for are a weight on the left arm and then a tightness of the chest and everything. And that's not necessarily the same for women as it is for men. And yet, when they have the heart attack, they kind of look at it and they think to themselves, well, these aren't the symptoms of a heart attack. I don't think that's what it is. And anyone who knows about heart attacks knows that, time is muscle. So actually recognizing or at least asking for help early is vital. This is a really important insight to resolve, but understanding why women don't do it is critical to being able to solve that problem. So the why is vital. And then the final part of that is wow. Wow, no one's done anything about that. Now you say that, that's really interesting and therefore obvious. And I could almost immediately think how we could start doing something about it. But why has nobody done something about that? Why has that statistic been there in the public kind of consciousness for 20, 30 years, and yet no one solved it? Why? And if we solve it, what immense value will we be creating? Brilliant. Now, one of the big problems, however, from when it comes to insights is people get this data, but then unfortunately they do this process called self-completion. Now, self-completion is they look at the data, they think to themselves, why is that happening? And then they answer that themselves. They go off into a room, 7G inside their building, and they start solving the problem themselves based on their own perspective, their own kind of prejudice or bias or whatever you want to call it. Now, I'm going to play a little game with you here. If we go back to Mentimeter, so I'm just going to switch to Mentimeter. You can do the same here. And I'm going to change the question. So the question is going to be, do you personally brush your teeth in hot or cold water? While you're doing that, I'll explain to you that 80% of the world's population clean their teeth in cold water. Now, that's contrary to pretty much everything else that they do, right? So if they're washing their car, they'll tend to use warm water. If they're washing their clothes, they'll have a washing machine with a dial that they can turn the temperature up from 30 to 40 degrees centigrade or 40 to 60 degrees. Or if they open their dishwasher halfway through the washing cycle, they'll be hit in the face with a big cloud of steam because it's really, really hot inside their dishwasher. Presumably, the manufacturer of the dishwasher has concluded the warmer the water, the hotter the water, the more effectively it cleans those dishes. Now, as you can see with the votes coming in here, the exception to that in our entire life experience is that most people clean their teeth in cold water. That's contrary to pretty much everything else that they do. So you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? we have an observation, don't we? I haven't given you an insight. I've told you that you were going to vote this way. You've pretty much proven my point for me. I'm statistically accurate. However, you know, from everything I've just told you, we have some interesting and curious data here, but that's not the same thing at all as having insight. So ask ourselves why this is happening. Well, you know, one of the reasons that people give for this is that they say, well, I think warm or hot water is poisonous. You know, it comes in through the pipes and it's got lead in it, or it's got it's bred bacteria in the boiler, or it comes from a static tank in the roof of my house with a dead pigeon in it. So I shouldn't drink warm or hot water because it's poisonous, and if I brush my teeth in it, I would die. Or they say, well, no, it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the fact that cold water is more refreshing than warm water. It reacts with the mint and menthol, gives me a sensation of freshness. Freshness equals cleanliness. Or other people say, no, it's nothing to do with that. It's the hand that I hold the toothbrush in, and then the free hand is the one that's oriented towards the cold water tap. And so, you know, that is what they say. So the answers to those questions are multiple and varied. You know, it can change by culture. It can change by geography. You know, some people say, well, I live in a warm country, so it's about the ambient temperature in my bathroom in the morning when I go in there. And ultimately, it's nothing more complex than this is refreshing because it's so warm, and I get up in the morning and it wakes me up. And so that, I would say, is, you know, how we need to think about insights. If you go into a room, and I'll tell you, this has happened to me loads of times, where there's 20 Americans in a room and they're talking about insights to do with Europe or to do with Asia or to do with Africa or whatever. And you have people in a room and they sort of start self-completing those insights. They will do it with all the best will in the world, based on their own culture, based on their own prejudice, based on their own experience. I've regularly sat with people, they'll go, you know, this is what people understand and this is how people talk. And I'll say, no one talks like that. Who talks like that? And they'll say, well, that's a regular word. I hear people use that all the time. No, they don't. I'll say only 10 people in the world use that word, and they're all sitting in this room. But because you all sit together over lunch and because you all talk together, you've concluded that this is normal behavior, that real people think like this, but they absolutely don't. You think like that, and that's influencing the way that you behave and the way that you think. So, you know, critically important here is you cannot self-complete these observations into insights within your own company. Really, really worrying, I'll tell you, is when someone says to me, well, we're consumers, aren't we? Everyone in this company is a customer or consumer. Why don't we just save time on market research and just go and interview each other? I mean, that will save an enormous amount of time. Well, that's an appalling idea, because everyone in your company is technically much more advanced in understanding the technology than a real person. Everyone in your company is close to your company strategy, best will in the world. They can't put that out of their mind. So, you know, companies go to extraordinary lengths to try and avoid actually talking to their customers. I don't know why this is. They'll go, well, couldn't we just do an online survey? That would save us a bit of time. I mean, we don't really want to get on an aeroplane and actually have to fly to China. That would be extraordinarily complicated. Why can't we just guess what the Chinese want and then spend $10 million selling to them or creating a product for them? And you think, well, as a percentage of the total cost of this project, this tiny piece of research that I'm asking for you to do, which is just to check what people want and check what people need, and that your assumptions are correct, seems like a fraction of the total project. So there we go. Now, one other way of kind of getting from observations to insights is to ask the 5 whys. What you do is you say to somebody, why are you doing that? And when they give you an answer, you ask again, but why are you doing that? Or that doesn't kind of tally with what I've seen you doing, so I'm going to challenge you on that. We're going to dig and we're going to dig and we're going to dig. This process comes from a quality control process created by Toyota called the 5 whys. It's called Design for Six Sigma, if you've heard of Design for Six Sigma, and it's a very effective way of synthesizing those observations into insights. Now, we can't spend too much time on it today, but Suffice to say, if you wanted to do insight synthesis, there are a number of tools and techniques that will get you from that data to that deeper understanding that you need to be at. Now, what is not an insight is something we call an accepted customer belief. This is a myth or belief that's created by the industry that prevents the target from actually getting what they really need, right? And I'm going to give you some examples of accepted customer belief. The more blades on my razor, the more effectively it shaves is not an insight. It's something the industry has artificially created as a problem in order to solve it, right? So, you know, first we had 2 blades on the razor, then 3 blades on the razor, then 4 blades on the razor, then 6 blades on the razor. Gillette Fusion actually has 1 blade on the back, 5 blades on the front. I mean, when this first came out, I looked at this and thought, well, why? Why does it have 5 blades on the front, 1 blade on the back? And they say, well, you know, 5 blades for that unparalleled, unprecedented close shave, right? And then 1 blade on the back for those hard to reach areas. And I think to myself, well, where are these hard to reach areas then? And they oblige by telling me, well, they're here on my face, down the sides, and here under my nose. And I think, well, they're not hard to reach. When did they become hard to reach? I'll tell you when they became hard to reach. When someone put 5 blades on my razor and it won't fit on my face anymore.
Looking for a close shave? Then you're looking for the new Quintipio Mega Shave. Now with 15 extra large blades.
This goes on in every industry. Hair dryers getting heavier and heavier and more powerful. You don't want a more and more powerful hair dryer because that's going to burn your head and burn your scalp. But the manufacturers build ceramic and ionic diffusion technologies in the end of their unnecessarily powerful hair dryers that's trying to dry your hair in the equivalent of an industrial wind tunnel, right? It happens in B2B as well as B2C. This is what they call the CT slice wars. So in nuclear medicine, you know, the idea of the more slices that you have, the more times you slice the body, the better the diagnostic advantage. Well, that may be true up to a point, but then these numbers start to kind of take control of the situation. Well, naturally, the more slices will inevitably be better. And then actually people become distracted from the real features of the product, the relevant insights, and just become obsessed with these numbers. And someone says, we'd like to talk to you about our new product. And someone says, well, I hear that Toshiba has 128 slice CT. Yeah, well, ignore that because that's not helpful. And those numbers aren't relevant. Well, I think they are relevant because everyone talks about those numbers. And I've now become obsessed with that number. And I'm not listening to anything other than that number. And that often prevents the customer getting real needs solved. So accepted beliefs are myths or beliefs that prevent the customer getting real insights solved. My favorite in this is dishwashers. I don't know whether you have a dishwasher that makes a bleep after it finishes washing, quite an urgent one. When you ask people why it does that, they tell you, well, obviously it does that to tell you that it's finished. But when you challenge, think about your 5 whys for a second, you go, well, go on then. Why do you need to know that so urgently? They'll say, oh, so you could open the door. Why do you need to open the door? Oh, they'll say, to let the steam out. Because if you don't let the steam out, then the steam will be trapped inside the dishwasher, condense back onto the dishes, prevent them from drying. Now, I'm no engineer, right? Let me tell you, but I think a good manufacturer could vent the steam out rather than require the consumer to be hanging around, right? Trying to empty their own dishwasher immediately in order to make it dry. But manufacturers have gone beyond that. What they've now started doing is automating the door to open itself. So they've gone beyond this myth, which is, well, rather than you hang around unnecessarily opening your own dishwasher, let the steam out, let's let the door open itself into your living space, let its own steam out. Be under no illusion what's happening here is there is a real lack of insight going on, and so people are perpetuating myths and beliefs, and then what they're doing is innovating on it. And I know what will happen is someone will go into a store and they'll say, what's that auto door opening mechanism for? And the shop assistant will say, well, that lets the steam out when it's trapped inside your washing machine or dishwasher. And then the consumer will say, well, why do I need that? And they'll say, because if you don't do that, your dishes won't dry. Well then, if that's the case, why doesn't this manufacturer have one and this manufacturer have one? And they go, oh, they're not so good. They're not as good. They're not as clever. So then those other manufacturers go, right, we don't believe this, but if we don't do it, we're not competitive. So you end up having this ridiculous race where everybody does it just simply because they have to. So then that perpetuates the myth. And then in 10 years' time, somebody will do a cost reduction exercise. They'll say, how much does this auto door opening mechanism cost on our dishwashers? And someone will say, well, you know what? You never needed that in the first place. That was completely unnecessary. That's solving a problem that doesn't really exist. Brilliant, they'll say. Take that off, save some money. Can't take it off because nobody will buy a dishwasher anymore that doesn't open its own door. Now, this story is funny, but not tragic. But last week, I was in Germany, and it took on a sort of sinister twist, because in Germany, they were telling me very, very recently, some woman got trapped in her bathroom because her auto door opening mechanism on her dishwasher trapped her behind the door of a dishwasher and behind the door of her bathroom. And she had to call for the emergency services. She was in there for days. I'm not making this up. You can go online. If you just look for German woman trapped in bathroom by auto door opening dishwasher, I'm sure that story will come up first. So here we have solutions which are not based on needs. They're based on myths and beliefs. So as I promised, I'm going to just cover off for you just a couple of my favorite insights here at the end, and then I'm going to turn to answering some questions. So in B2C, business to consumer, let's have a look at one. This is my favorite. This is from Love's. Now, if you're in the US, which I think most of you are, you'll know this brand. But I think this is a great example of insights being used in communication. These adverts are only about 20 seconds long, but they're based on the same sort of idea of insights running through, where if you're in this target group, you'll look at this and say, I recognize that. This company recognizes what I do, my experience, I've been there, I've seen that, I've done exactly what they're describing.
Piano. Clarinet. Violin.
Hey, what are you doing?
Music lesson. He has to start sometime.
Music lesson?
By their second kid, every mom is an expert and more likely to choose Loves than first-time moms. First kid? Second kid. By their second kid, every mom is an expert and more likely to choose Loves. Live, learn, and get Loves.
No. Germs. Icky germs. Cute. Cute. That's cute. Delete it. Cute.
By their second kid, every mom is an expert and more likely to choose Loves than first-time moms.
I think your kid's eating sand.
Probably.
Cute.
Live, learn, and get Loves.
Now, this is a great example. We could have a conversation that goes on for hours about who is the target here. Is it first mums? Is it second mums? Is it people who are worrying about those insights? Here's another one for the Dollar Shave Club. I don't know whether you've seen this, but
Hi,
this is
can you
a
open
very
the
good
razor
insight.
case, please?
Photo ID.
I'm just grabbing some razors.
Grabbing? Put your index finger in there, sir, please.
I just need to get in the case
Why do you need to get in the case so bad?
so I can buy some razors.
It's almost like they don't want you to buy their razors. Well, I want you to buy mine. DollarShaveClub.com delivers amazing razors for just a few bucks.
And this final one in the kind of B2C group is about consumers and millennials. So it's a particular segment of consumers that banks are trying to appeal to. Now, these guys aren't worried about pensions. They're not worried about investments. They're not worried about mortgages because they can't afford to buy these things. They're living day to day, and the cost of living is rising, and the cost of energy and all of these things are going up. And the old legacy banks are just kind of trying to sell them these products that they've historically pushed on them. And I think the insight is these people are saying, but I don't kind of subscribe to any of this. I can't achieve any of this. You keep trying to kind of tell me I've got this life that I haven't got. And if you're a what they call a fintech or a neobank or one of these new kind of upstarts on the block, you're stealing volume from the big banks because you're being more empathetic. You're saying, we get it. We get that you don't want to have that kind of classic bank account. You need a card. You need to pay for stuff. You need to have something that helps you budget, but you're living day to day. And we get that. And we're going to talk to you with insights that appeal to the reality of your situation. And I think this particular advert I'm about to show you is a really clear insight into how to talk to that millennial segmentation that the older banks just simply cannot appeal to.
My niece loves drawing houses, just like I used to draw, always with the little fence and the lovely red door. She writes "your house" and gives them to me with this smile as wide as the sea. And I'm always lost for what to say. I mean, the houses are beautiful. I'd move in today, but in terms of likeness, they're light years away. See, she never draws any damp, or a housemate with a drum kit, or my empty milk carton after every time he's drunk it. She never draws the pile of washing up, or those passive-aggressive post-its. Things I guess she's yet to notice. She just says, I can't wait to have my own house, like grown-ups do. And I think to myself, yeah, me too.
Now, I haven't got a great deal of time to talk about B2B. There's probably an entire webinar on B2B in its own right. But I wanted to give you some just quick examples of products that we're still using insights, but through a B2C or a B2C chain. So let's have a quick look at probably one of the simplest and easiest to understand.
Introducing new Corning Gorilla Glass 4. Now designed to be up to 2 times tougher against drops on rough surfaces. Make sure your smartphone has Corning Gorilla Glass 4.
Now let's think for a second what we're looking at here. This is a piece of glass, right? This is a component inside a smartphone or a tablet that would historically have been a supplier to a big company like Samsung. And Samsung are having to say now that their products contain this component. Not just that we made this flip phone or that this phone is whatever, but also on top of that, this B2B component within that is relevant to you. The insight being kids borrow your phone. I'm guessing that particular commercial, they borrow your phone, they use it, they're constantly playing. They have absolutely, I know this in our house, we have a stream of iPads going off to eBay for someone to replace the screen on them or something being sent off for repair because kids have absolutely no understanding of the value of these devices, and they're pulling them and fighting over them and dropping them on the floor. That kind of insight is driving what should be a relatively basic component of a phone to being something that a major manufacturer has to have, or it cannot sell its component. That is a really, if you look at the value being created by Dow Corning in terms of Gorilla Glass compared to what a standard piece of glass would be able to be sold for, that's being driven by value propositions and insights in a B2B chain. There's another example of somebody that was selling clothes tags inside clothes, and those little cotton things that say, dry clean only, or do not iron, or wash at this temperature. They're worth absolutely nothing in terms of what someone would be prepared to pay. And they wanted to sell these with RFID tags in them, but none of the procurement department, purchasing departments at the clothes manufacturers would buy, because the cost per item when you're making billions of pairs of jeans or clothes would be astronomical compared to what you could get a cotton one for. So what they did was they looked at how people actually buy clothes. They looked at the insights, and they found that when people go into the changing room in a big department store, it's a one-shot deal, right? What you do is you go around, you pick up all the items of clothes, you collect them together, and then you go in with 5 items of clothes. As somebody pointed out last week, actually, in Paris when I was training, it's a funny old thing that the changing room is such an awful place to be when you're buying such expensive premium products. They make that experience awful. So you go in, you don't really want to be there. It's massively embarrassing. People keep opening the curtain and looking in, and this is not great. And if those clothes don't fit you, you don't go back out. The insight is you don't go back out and go back round and go find more. You go, right, that didn't work. Well, I gave it my best shot, but for today, I'm done. And you leave. And so there's a load of lost sales. So what happens in this company came up with a solution called the magic mirror. You go in with a pair of jeans, you try them on, it says, did they fit? No. Okay, but do you want a bigger pair or a smaller pair? Oh, I want a smaller pair. Don't want a size 10, want a size 8. And they go, well, stay there, because then the shop assistant will go back into the store, get that size 8, bring them to you before you leave the changing room. Because if we can do that before you leave the changing room, we won't lose that sale. Or it says, I noticed you brought in a coat from our signature collection, winter collection, but you haven't brought in the matching scarf and gloves, right? And hat. Did you not know there was a scarf and gloves? Well, if you just tap the mirror, which ones you want, someone will go get them for you before you leave the changing room. Now, because you're using insights in the value chain, you're not having to sell the component to the procurement department on its kind of cost, on its absolute basic lowest common denominator value. What you're doing is you're explaining to them the upsell that will go on in the store, the value that comes from solving a real problem in the value chain. That's a much better place to be shifting the paradigm of the purchasing department than trying to just explain this costs this and this new one costs this. So value and insights work in lots of different ways within the value chain. We have tools for doing that, which we talk at length about on our training courses, our big training courses, and we can work with companies to work out who is the key stakeholder, what are the insights, how those insights run through the chain. Because in B2B, I recognize it's a lot more complicated. And then final example, I just said I'd leave you with one bad example before I finish. This one is my favorite bad example at the moment. This is for LG knock knock window in window fridge.
You want some juice? Here, you hold the bottle. Ta-da! Oh. Wait, buddy, where's your bottle? It's all right, we'll get another one. Where is it? Oh. Yeah. All right, bud, let's give this a try. Cool. Liam? Uh-oh. Liam? Liam! Here we go again.
Okay, so for me, I'm not entirely sure what the insight is here, but apparently knocking on the door of my fridge so that a window magically appears and shows me what's in it is a massive improvement over actually opening the door and looking inside. I think it's a tenuous push to say that that's a real need, a real insight. I would suggest to you that's much more like a technology looking for a solution. If you want to know more about insights, I mean, we've had a whistle-stop tour here in the last hour, but if you want to find out more, you can go to mattshaw.com. If you aren't connected with me on LinkedIn already, just send me a LinkedIn request and we can have a chat about you know, what insights you're currently generating, how you're generating. Is there a way to improve that within your organization? I saw in the original Mentimeter question that your kind of view is a lot of you have this data, my suspicion, but you're not transferring that into insights that are actionable for you. That's actually quite easy to do. You need to run an insight synthesis workshop or some kind of clinic in which you can take what you've got and immediately kind of work on it. And with a little bit of outside expertise, that can be very, very easy to achieve. I'm going to just ask you one last question before I open up to the Q&As here. And the question I want to ask on Mentimeter is, if we ran another webinar, what should it be on? What would you like to see in a future webinar? So let me just turn that question here. What should the next webinar be about? I was thinking of doing one, you know, in a couple of months. I'm kind of, I'm aware that different organizations have different sort of problems or areas that they need to focus on. I'd be fascinated to hear where you think the issues are and where we should focus under the conversation in the future. Oh, as this is going, I can see that targeting and segmentation and insights in B2B are kind of key ones. I could understand that because it is much more complicated creating insights in B2B, especially if you've got a complex stakeholder chain. Not something that we will have a great chance to talk about in such a short period of time here, but a dedicated focus on that is really worthwhile, because I think B2B companies don't historically do this very well. So if your company can sort of nail the process of creating insights in B2B, I think that would give you a massive competitive advantage and would change, how you approach selling the value of your products through the total value chain. Okay, right, let's have a look at some questions then. If people want to have some questions answered, let's asking. Erin Smith says, changing internal definitions where misinterpretations of facts can be challenging. How do you suggest starting that trend? Okay, let me answer that for you. I think a lot of this comes from where your insights are coming into the organization. So let's imagine that it's your sales force that are bringing this information in. I think a very simple way of doing this would be to train your sales force to ask better questions. You would be amazed how many times I say to a company, why are you making this product? And they say, because a sales guy came in and said, one customer said, if you make this, I'll buy it. So then they bring that specification into the organization and say, look, I've got a sale. And the organization says, well, if one person wants to buy it, maybe loads of people would buy that. So they go off, they spend $10 million in 3 years developing a product based on one request that turns out to be some outlying request or an inappropriate solution. And I think the first place I would start is training your sales force. So they go, well, that's a very interesting request, but I've got some further questions, because if I can understand what you're actually trying to achieve rather than just take a broad specification from you, then maybe we could solve that in a more appropriate way. Maybe if I asked you some different questions, I could fully understand what you're trying to achieve, and we could give you a much more appropriate answer. So, training people on asking open questions, training people on asking questions about the whole and not the drill would be a really, really good way of doing that. And then if that's your product managers that are meeting people, or your R&D folks that are meeting people, or your sales, it doesn't really matter. I think training people to ask better questions, more open questions, would be a really good place to start. How do you find out the why? Is this something we asked the customer? I got asked. Well, I may have answered that with the 5 whys process, but I do think the answer to that is you need to run qualitative research. Again, one of the big mistakes companies make is they think, well, I need quantitative kind of statistical significance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some massive online questionnaire to 100 customers. And what they ask is what they already assume. So they ask questions that say, is this right? Is this what you want? With binary answers, yes or no. Now, that process doesn't tell you anything you don't already know. It doesn't teach you anything unexpected. You're just qualifying or validating your going in assumptions. So in terms of how do you get the why, you have to be qualitative initially, because the customer may say something you weren't expecting. And what you need to be able to do is develop that immediately. Oh, okay, that I wasn't expecting you to say. Well, tell me a little bit more. Let's do the 5 whys. Let's dig under the surface of it. A survey, a quantitative survey, isn't going to be sufficiently reactive in order to let you dig beneath the surface. So my advice would be, how do you find the why in answer to the question? You start qualitatively, even if it's only a small base size, don't worry. And then if you want to kind of quantify that later on by factoring that up and running a quantitative study, well, do that afterwards. So it's always a process of qualitative research, interviews, one-on-ones or focus groups or whatever that kind of methodology is, followed by factoring it up with a survey to just validate the outcome of the qualitative. Okay, in reviewing insights, how do you balance or factor in table stakes to the insight in the right solution? Table stakes, yeah, well, I think in my terminology, when I was first working at Procter & Gamble, we used to call those things hygiene factors, right? Hygiene factors are things you have to do, or else you're not even being considered in the first place. But they are not insights in the sense that the customer actually expects you to do those. If you say this is safe, they go, well, of course it's safe. It wouldn't be legal if it wasn't safe. Why are you focusing on it being safe when I absolutely need it to be accurate, or I need it to be comfortable, or I need it to be fast? So the answer to that question is there is a piece of research called Kano analysis, which I train when I do the bigger training. And Kano analysis does exactly that. What it does is it identifies the difference between must-haves, dissatisfiers, table stakes, hygiene factors, whatever you want to call them, standard requirement, and things that are actually satisfiers, so real needs, and it separates those. And that helps you say to the organization, can we stop endlessly debating how safe this needs to be? It needs to be safe. The customer expects it to be safe, but that isn't the value of what we'll be doing. So let's just kind of engineer that to the point that we can do it, but that is not the focus of what we are solving here. That's not separating us from the competition. The insight is something else. And this thing, yeah, it's called Kano. It was created by a Japanese academic called Kano, and it's a really simple way of identifying the difference between table stakes and insights. Right, one more. There's a plethora of new technologies these days, including AI. How can inventors of technology be more insight-driven when the technology is so engaging in themselves? Well, that's a good question. Well, the truth is, if you are too close to your own solution, then you end up thinking that the point of the exercise is the technology. And what I always teach in the training that I do is the technology is never the point of the exercise. It's an enabler to a benefit, but it is not the benefit in its own right. So AI is never an insight. IoT is never the insight. Blockchain is not the insight. It's a technology that enables you to solve a problem. And we need to always separate the problem from the solution in our mind. No matter how close you are, no matter how much you love your technology is not the point of the exercise. How do you do that? You know, truth be known, it sounds like I would say this, wouldn't I? But if you bring in somebody external who is agnostic of the technology to be sort of a person working with you on it, they are much more likely to say, do you know what, that is fascinating, but that is not the point. I don't understand what you're talking about. That's way too complicated. What is the point of that? Why would it do that? I don't understand that. All those really, really boring questions that somebody who's just that little bit further distant from the technology will ask and challenge you when you get a little bit too close. Because, of course, people work in technology companies because they love technology, and they are employed because they're problem solvers, and they're brilliant at doing that. But it does take a slightly different skill to stand back from it and go, yeah, I know it's an unpopular thing to say, but why exactly is it doing that? And what value is that adding in any sort of real world terms? And who would want that? And why would they want it? And all these horrible questions that I spend my entire life asking. So hopefully that answers the question for you. I am going to make the webinar available as a download. It will get sent to you, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, tomorrow. So within 24 hours, we'll get a lovely edit for you of the US version and the European version added together. If you want to talk to me about insights or running insight projects or running a value proposition training or insight training or anything like that, then my email is mattshaw@mattshaw.com, or you can visit www.mattshaw.com or contact me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And when you've kind of had time to digest this, do drop me an email and tell me what you thought, and whether you think we should do some more webinars in the future. And one last thing to say is, do feel free to circulate this link to the webinar to anybody that you want to within your organization. If you've got other colleagues that need to see this, or you've got senior managers that you want to persuade that they need to do this, then by all means, when I send you the link to the webinar, circulate and disseminate that as widely as you like, or on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever that is. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for staying with it and listening to all of this. And I wish you a good rest of the morning and afternoon. Okay, goodbye.